A poor village boy turned war hero, an unlikely president who found himself at the helm of power through tragic coincidence. Only to become the dictator whose rule encouraged the Egyptian streets to rise up against him, accusing him of transforming Egypt into his family's and his party's private property.
ارحل ارحل مش عايزينك مش عايزينك يسقط يسقط حسني مبارك حسني اتجنن حسني اتجنن حسني اتجنن حسني اتجنن ولا هنمشي ولا هو هيمشي.
It's been 10 years since the people of Egypt ended the almost 30-year reign of Hosni Mubarak, the longest-serving Egyptian leader since Muhammad Ali Pasha. Our story today is about this modern-day pharaoh's rise, reign, and fall. Hosni Mubarak was born in 1928 in a place called Kafr al-Masalha in the Munafiyah government. Son of an office clerk and an illiterate mother, it's safe to say he came from very humble beginnings. He became a career officer in the Egyptian Air Force and rose steadily through the ranks during both the Nasser and Sadat eras, becoming commander of the Air Force and deputy defense minister in 1972. Accredited with doubling the number of fighter pilots in the Air Force and later for his key role in Egypt's victory in the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Mubarak was officially a war hero. In 1975, Mubarak was on his way to meet President Sadat, hoping for his dream appointment of ambassador in London, which would have suited his British wife, Susan. But to his surprise, he was appointed vice president. Now, the funny thing is that Sadat was born in Munafiyah and also had a half-British wife, so maybe it was the Munafiyah UK connection, who knows? And so the next 6 years saw him flying around, meeting and signing. And then, on October 6th, 1981, a day of celebration marking the nation's 1973 victory in the Sinai, Mubarak stood shoulder to shoulder with the Nobel laureate Sadat, who moments later was murdered on live TV. Mubarak remained unscathed, untouched, and just like that, Mubarak was president of Egypt. There is a funny anecdote in Egypt that summarizes Mubarak's reign. A man walks into a coffee shop and sees 3 photos on the wall. He asks, "Who is this?" The owner replies, "That is Nasser, the leader of the 1952 revolution, our pride." The man then asks, "What about this guy?" The owner replies, "That is Sadat, the man who liberated Sinai in 1973, a true statesman." So then the man finally asks, "And what about him?" "Ha," the owner says, "That's Hosni, the father of my business partner." Indeed, the Mubarak era, particularly the last 2 decades, was one characterized by corruption, nepotism, and cronyism. But it didn't start out like that. In the 1980s, Mubarak had promised to abide by his conditional limit of 2 terms, to clamp down on corruption and not involve his family in politics. For a quick stint, he even freed political prisoners. But there was a catch, of course. The first thing Mubarak did in the wake of Sadat's murder was enact emergency laws giving the police and army lots of room to do as they pleased. And this emergency lasted about 30 years. During this time, he curbed freedom of speech, opposition, he rigged elections, used parliament to change the constitution and end the term limits in place. And then his family got in on the act. Susan Mubarak began an obsession with winning a Nobel Prize, trying as hard as she could to carve out an image of a charitable philanthropist. She even started a literacy campaign called Reading for All, which involved putting her face on the back of every book, which kind of says it all. It was much more about her than anything else. Her unconstitutional grandeur as First Lady only grew as she planned to put her son in power and become the first mother of the Egyptian kingdom a la Cersei Lannister. Which brings us to young Gamal, who left his Bank of America job in London, well, I guess to inherit the Republic, a bit like this guy. He became head of Egypt's National Democratic Party Politburo. That was neither national or democratic, mind you. Gamal used his influence to practice what is referred to as neoliberal authoritarianism, basically taking over control of Egypt's industry, agriculture, and finance sectors, splitting the cake between himself and his friends. But Gamal lacked in charisma and was unpopular among the people, who were witnessing poverty, illiteracy, and inequality spreading like a plague in their country. There were several assassination attempts on Mubarak's life, the most significant being in 1995 in Ethiopia, upon which he immediately returned to Egypt, giving life to this famous quote from Egyptian cleric Muhammad Mitwalli Sha'rawi.
إذا كنت قدرنا فليوفقك الله، وإذا كنا قدرك فليعينك الله على أن تتحمل. والسلام.
Mubarak's destiny was one intertwined with Western interests more than anything. He guaranteed the US a steady supply of oil to world markets. He upheld the Camp David Accords and guaranteed peace with Israel. He became Israel's go-to guy when it came to applying pressure to the Palestinians. He supported the US in their intervention in the first Gulf War after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1991. Egypt was even forgiven half of its debt in return for fighting the Iraqis. In short, he was the West's man in the region, guaranteeing peace and stability. But at what cost and for how long? Well, 30 years is a long time, but it all came crashing down fast. To be precise, 18 days. Mubarak, who had grown so obsessed with staying in power, even at 80 years of age, had prolonged his son's inheritance of power, survived multiple severe health issues, assassinations, and even the sadness that overwhelmed him with the untimely death of his grandson Muhammad Ali. He could have stepped down many a time, but in true pharaonic arrogance and illusion of divinity, he turned a blind eye to what was a wave of people-centered dissent that would rise and sweep him and others of his generation of Arab despots. On January 25, 2011, what was supposed to be National Police Day turned into a protest in Tahrir Square. Thousands of youth were enraged at the murder of a young man called Khalid Saeed by the Egyptian police. They shouted, they resisted, they cleaned their streets, protected their neighbors, and the whole world started watching. At first, like any soon-to-be dethroned king, he was resistant, stating that he will live and die in Egypt like a true war hero, and that it is history that will determine his legacy. But when this happened, everyone knew it was all over.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أيها المواطنون، في هذه الظروف العصيبة التي تمر بها البلاد، قرر الرئيس محمد حسني مبارك تخليه عن منصب رئيس الجمهورية.
Almost 800 people sacrificed their lives, and freedom had prevailed. Mubarak and his sons were imprisoned, but eventually acquitted of all charges. Hosni Mubarak died at age 91 last year. And well, how will he be remembered? Well, for some, he remains a hero that brought about a time of stability. For some, he's a representation of all that was and is still wrong in Egypt. For me, he's a reminder of the ills of power, and that a man who chooses to be in power, even a pharaoh, will eventually be held to account by his people.